Antwerp, the Friday market. The 20th century draws to a close, yet for more than 400 years public auctions have been held on this delightful square, with the beautiful Plantin-Moretus museum in the background. On the west side of this square, the characteristic 18th century facade reminds us that up until 1876, it housed the Plantin-Moretus family's home and workshops. Christoffel Plantin was born around 1520 near the French city of Tours. As a skilled bookbinder, he arrived in Antwerp in 1549, and from 1555, he worked as a printer-publisher. His publications were of such high quality that it was not long before he became a renowned publisher throughout the world. For some time, Plantin was arch-typographer to King Philip II of Spain, and thereby met a lot of very influential people who couldn't help but be impressed by his craftsmanship. His visitors were received in this small room. The Lion Hunt by Rubens hangs above the fireplace. The original now hangs in Munich. This painting is amongst some 150 paintings and portraits that form part of the museum's collection. The walls of this small but cosy room are hung with remarkable and rare 16th century Flemish tapestries. They depict scenes from the life of the mythical queen of the Massagetes, who defeated and killed Cyrus, the great king of the Persians. The tapestries next to the fireplace depict allegorical scenes. Plantin welcomes his guests in the great drawing room, which now contains, amongst others, these two beautiful 17th century art cabinets from Antwerp. As in most of the rooms of the Plantin house, we find here the golden compass, Plantin's symbol, with its motto Labore et Constantia, work and persistency, and also the Moretus' star. These symbols can be seen depicted not only in the stained glass windows, but also in tapestries, paintings, on the porcelain china, and on the sculptured corbels. Here hang the portraits of Plantin, his wife Geneviève, their daughter Martina, and their son-in-law Jan Moretus, as do those of Balthasar I Moretus and Justus Lipsius. The little lion stairs, bearing the coat of arms of Balthasar II and his wife Anne-Marie de Neuf, is situated under this subdued vaulted gallery. Via the gallery, we enter the small shop situated on Holy Ghost Street. Along the walls of this 17th century bookshop, bookcases and shelves contain Plantin's prints. Here we can see a beautiful example of one of the two color prints that came from the Plantin presses. On the counter stand the scales and carrot boxes, used in thwarting counterfeiters. A list of outlawed books and a price list of school books fixed by the local magistrate still hang on the wall. Through the leaded windows, we have a view of the back of the shop where the accountant sits doing his daily accounts. At the end of the counter is a book press to prevent the freshly printed sheets from curling up. As in many of the patrician houses, the walls of this dining room are draped with Oudenarde tapestries. Green is the predominant colour in these pastoral scenes, and the term verdures, by which they're known, comes from the French vert, meaning green. In a small passageway in the inner court, we can see the likeness of Balthasar III on a beautifully wrought shield set into the wall. With its flower beds and vines, the inner court and the covered gallery emit a feeling of peace, an oasis in the middle of a city, with all around it the spirit of the Flemish Renaissance. There is a lovely view of the south and west facades from the Lion Stairs, the oldest part of the Plantin residence. The busts of Plantin-Moretus, Justus Lipsius, and Christoffel Plantin stand here. The bust of Balthasar I Moretus, who commissioned this wing, graces the wall of the east facade. Above the gallery, busts of later masters of the Officina Plantiniana can be seen. The publication of a book has many stages. The casting of the print types was the basis of this typographical operation. At the tip of a long steel rod, the letter is cut in relief using files and chisels. Parts of the letter that cannot be reached with a file are removed using a negative punch. The punches are hammered into a copper block. The letter is now in its matrix. The matrices are then carefully touched up until the impressions are constant, thereby fitting perfectly into the mold. The casting can then begin. The matrix is secured in the bottom of the pot. The molten metal, an alloy of lead, tin, copper, and iron, is then ladled onto the mold. Once cooled, the molded letter is taken out and filed to its correct size. The museum still has some 15,000 matrices and 5,000 punches, representing some 80 different sorts of letter types. The printing shop storeroom shelves are evidence of this diversity and are full from top to bottom with type cases. The loose letter types were collected together and stored in type cases. These flat open cases were divided up into compartments of different sizes. The compositor holds his compositor's stick in his left hand. This is a wooden hook on which words or sentences can be set one above the other. With his right hand he takes the letters in their correct order out of the type case. Then the words are put together to form columns and eventually pages on a wooden board called a galley. The pages form a composition. This is then strongly bound with a cord. Then placed in a wooden frame, which rests on the stone of the press. The composition is then secured tightly in the frame by using small wooden blocks. This is called coining. The text is now ready for proofing. The text is inked using a pad, a semi-spherical leather ball filled with cording wool. The moistened paper is then laid on the timpan. The frisket and timpan are folded shut and laid on the composition. The carriage is then slid under the printing plate, and by pulling sharply on the handle, the page is printed. The printing plate is lifted up, the carriage turned round, and the frisket and timpan folded back, allowing the printed page to be removed. The pages are checked by proofreaders for all kinds of mistakes that can occur during the setting. The corrector checks for mistakes in pagination, punctuation, accents, spelling, abbreviations and letter types, and then marks them with a conform mark. The corrected pages are then laid in order in the relevant drawers of the corrector's desk. The corrected proof is then returned to the setter, who then corrects the mistakes and replaces the incorrect letters with the correct ones. There follows a second proofing, what is known as the revised proof. This is again passed to the corrector, who checks if his corrections have been correctly actioned. When satisfied, he puts his stamp of approval, his fiat, on the revised proof. The text can now be printed on one of the many presses in the shop. At the height of his career, Plantin printed as many as 50 publications a year on at least 16 different presses, a fact that takes on a real importance when compared to France's biggest printers, the Estienne family, who never used more than 4 printing presses. Plantin was the most important printer of his time. Thousands of books were printed at the Officina Plantiniana, including many scientific and religious publications, bound for Spain and her colonies. Although production slowed down during the troubled years of the 16th century, the Officina Plantiniana managed to keep up its high standard of quality. Many important books were still printed on a regular basis, like this one on botany by Labore. The Thesaurus Teutonicae Linguae, the first Dutch dictionary, initiated by Plantin himself. The Biblia Regia, or Biblia Polyglotta, a Bible printed in 5 languages: Hebrew, Greek, Latin, Chaldaic, and Syriac, 8 parts in folio. The most important work ever undertaken by a printer in the Netherlands. And Rembert de Doen's Kruidboek, a beautiful edition, complete with colored woodcuts. Plantin published many of the works of the great humanist Justus Lipsius, and this room is named after him. The room is decorated in 16th century Spanish gilt leather, guadamasil, a very rare example whose Moorish origin is quite clear from its elegant arabesque motifs. Several paintings remind us of the great scholar. Above the fireplace hangs an old copy of Rubens's Justus Lipsius and his pupils. Philip Rubens, amongst others, can be seen alongside the great humanist, and in the background Rubens has portrayed himself in the painting. Another portrait of Lipsius hangs above the entrance. And here we see the portrait of Seneca, the Roman philosopher, painted by Rubens. The office is situated next to the Justus Lipsius room, and both these rooms are part of the oldest part of the house. Rich Malines gilt leather decorates the walls. It's clear that this is an office, and the fine oak desk, the letter case set into the wall, and the small safe, reinforced with iron bars, are evidence of a successful businessman. The museum is rich in archives, an inexhaustible mine of information regarding the history of the Officina Plantiniana, of the art of printing, and a record of the economic, social, and cultural status of our regions of that period. In 1559, Pompe Funèbre was published, and with this publication, describing the funeral ceremonies following Emperor Charles V's death, Plantin became really established. For the first time, copper engravings were used on a large scale as book illustrations. Copperplate engraving is an intaglio process, which, although causing more problems than when using woodcut, allows a more qualitatively refined work. The Antwerp Baroque book reached its zenith with the designs of its frontpieces by, amongst others, Peter Paul Rubens, and became an international leader in its style. Copperplate engraving and etching are an intaglio process. Before introducing the ink, the plate is heated to help the fluidity of the ink, thus allowing a smoother surfacing of the parts to be engraved. With a pad, a piece of felt, or simply with the fingertips, the ink is rubbed into the engraving. The ink remaining on the surface of the plate is wiped away carefully with the hand. The effect made by the ink that remains between the lines is called intaglio. The moistened paper is then laid out on the plate and covered with a thick and flexible layer of felt. Plate, paper, and felt are turned through the two cylinders of the intaglio press. By exerting pressure, the paper is pushed into the deeper grooves and soaks up the ink. Plantin was quick to see the many advantages offered by using copperplate engraving and etching. Finer and more precise work was now possible, giving a wider tone spectrum. A greater gradation between white and black, including all the shades of grey, could be arrived at according to the depth of the ink and the distance between the lines. Using copper plates, a much larger impression than that using woodcuts was possible. Copperplate engraving resulted in far more detailed drawings in books on anatomy. There are still about 15,000 woodcuts and 3,000 copper plates remaining as examples of the work of the Plantin-Moretus family. In 1640, Balthazar I Moretus established the largest of the three beautiful libraries in the Plantin house. The museum has in total some 30,000 volumes of beautifully handwritten books, including the Chronica by Froissart and King Wenceslas of Bohemia's Bible, which dates from 1403. Besides fine examples of music scores, one can also find the so-called 36-line Gutenberg Bible. The fact that the library was also used as a chapel is borne out by the 17th century busts depicting saints and popes, as well as the altarpiece, Christ on the Cross. Nearly all of the Plantin-Moretus prints can be found here, as well as a beautiful collection of Antwerp prints and a wide choice of works from foreign topographers. Two globes, depicting the earth and the heavens, indicate the important role played by the Low Countries, and similarly the Plantin house, in the development of scientific geography and cartography in the years between 1540 and the 18th century. The map of Antwerp, drawn by Virgilius Bolognensis and Cornelius Graffius in 1565, cannot fail but hold our attention. A remarkable example of 16th century cartography, of which no other copies are known to exist. Following the maid from the kitchen, we arrive in the 17th century drawing room, where the company is seated around the table. One of the ladies is working lace, nothing unusual in the Plantin household, since some of Plantin's daughters had flourishing businesses in lace and embroidery. The 18th century showcase contains a lovely collection of glass, porcelain and pottery belonging to the Moretus family, as can be seen by the coat of arms inscribed on them. In the meantime, the visitor's wife has seated herself at the harpsichord. Inside the harpsichord's cover is an adaptation of a painting by Rubens, St. Cecilia playing organ. Plantin has offered his guests some proofs, and the visitor is once again struck by the craftsmanship of the Officina Plantiniana. The guests start to leave, thanking Plantin for his hospitality and the guided tour of his home and workshops, a visit that cannot fail but leave a lasting impression. Plantin's day is drawing to a close. Before going to bed, he'll check the proofs and manuscripts of that day, and then it'll be time to enjoy a well-deserved night's rest.